All right, we're live.
Great. Good afternoon and welcome to the SACOG Land Use and Natural Resource Committee for Thursday, October 5th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. We are going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Bulahan, is that something you can do for us, please?
Okay, pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you so much. Next up is roll call.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bulahan?
Here.
Frost? Absent. Gore? Absent. Harris?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Knisely?
Here.
Kozlowski?
Here.
West? Director West, you may have to turn off your video.
Here.
Oh, thank you. Vice Chair Baines? Absent. Vice Chair Lozano?
Here.
Chair Bradford?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Excellent, thank you. Next up is public communications. Any person wishing to address the committee on any item not on the agenda may do so at this time. Do we have any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, it looks like Vice Chair Baines has joined us as well.
You'll note for the record that Vice Chair Baines is present.
Thank you.
First up is consent. There are two items on consent. The remote committee meeting and approval of the minutes from September 7th. Are there any board comments or questions on the consent agenda? Any public comment on the consent agenda?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion?
Lozano moves. Second by Baines.
Great. Thank you. We have a first and a second. Roll call vote, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bulahan?
Aye.
Frost? Absent. Gore? Absent. Harris?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Knisely?
Yes.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
West?
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines?
Aye.
Vice Chair Lozano?
Aye.
And Chair Bradford?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. Next, we're moving into information, starting with item 3, West Sacramento planning efforts, infill, and new growth activities. And good afternoon, Greg. I guess you're going to be introducing this.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Thank you. Greg Chu on the planning and programming team here at SACOG. And periodically we come back to the committee and bring one of our local agency members to talk about what planning efforts they've got going on. Last month we heard from Placer County, and prior to that we've heard from Yuba City, Folsom, Auburn, Marysville, and Citrus Heights. So we'll continue to keep doing this because as long as the committee is interested, because I think there's a lot of interesting projects that are happening around. So with us today, we have 3 members of the city of West Sacramento. Andrea Oos is the community development director since 2021. She oversees the city of West Sacramento's planning, building, development, engineering, transportation, environmental services, and sustainability and code enforcement functions. That was a mouthful there. Jason McCoy is the city's transportation division manager for the past 9 years, and he's overseeing the transportation planning programs and project development for enhancing citywide mobility. And then David Tilley is the city's principal planner since 2014. He oversees the day-to-day planning team functions and the Planning Commission Secretary and has project management responsibilities for new development projects, zoning, general plans, specific plans, retail cannabis, business licensing, and many other responsibilities. And something I just learned about him is he's a former SACOG intern. I've known him for almost 20 years now, and I did not know that. So anyway, I will turn it over to Andrea, and then she can introduce the team.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I just wanted to take this opportunity because I'm relatively new to the region to introduce myself as the community development director and to introduce 2 leaders within the community development team. We have a lot going on in West Sacramento, and I'm honored that we were asked to present to you today. So I won't take up any more time, but I will kick it off with Jason McCoy, our supervising transportation planner, to start the presentation. Thank you again.
Thanks, Andrea. So again, Jason McCoy, supervising transportation planner and division manager. We've been asked to present some of our land use projects, but of course you can't look at land use in a vacuum. And so as the transportation group, we're responsible for, mobility and connectivity in the city and enhancing connections regionally with our partners right over the river, Sacramento, and then to the west to Davis and beyond. So I'm just going to present to you a few of our projects and then pass it over to David. Next slide, please. So a few of our strategic projects that we're working on, and all of these I'm presenting to you today, are funded in part by SACOG. All of them involve basically SB 375 implementation, and our funding comes from a variety of sources, everywhere from some of our local funding to state and federal funding. From SACOG, we've got everything from the Green Means Go program through to community design and the regional programs. Sacramento Avenue is extremely important to us because it is in the disadvantaged community zone and has largely been ignored, may not be the word, but has not necessarily received the attention that it should over the years. And mostly because of the I Street Bridge Replacement Project, which I'll talk about later, a $320 million movable bridge project connecting Sacramento and West Sacramento. It's extremely important that we, move forward with this corridor in a more sustainable and complete streets comprehensive way. So we actually received funding from SACOG, a combination of Green Means Go as well as community design, to look at both infrastructure underground and above ground in order to make this a much more usable corridor, both from the mobility standpoint, but also for looking at the future for affordable housing and infill development in the area. And even just since looking at this corridor, we're about halfway through our study now, we've seen a lot more interest from local homeowners, from the development community, and folks just starting to see the vision of this area as being something much more than just a through street passing through West Sacramento into Sacramento. We are pretty close here to wrapping up our studies, which will be completed in November for most of the surface improvements. We're going to start looking at the infrastructure capacity and needs starting in November, and we're looking to finalize this whole plan in 2025. Next slide. Along the same lines of corridors, we have another east-west corridor, and this is the primary corridor, which used to be the state highway going through West Sacramento, the Lincoln Highway, connecting over Tower Bridge into Sacramento. We received funding about $3.58 million from SACOG for an almost $16 million project to completely revamp the corridor, both from a maintenance and modernization standpoint, but also to create a road diet here in some of the places that were a total of 6 lanes, and reduce this to make it much more bike ped friendly. This included sidewalks, class 4 bikeways, and a lot of crossing enhancements in order to help folks going from north to south between neighborhoods. Next slide. So this is the bridge that I just mentioned. This is the C Street Rail Yards Bridge, also known as the I Street Bridge Replacement Project. This is a regionally serving movable bridge project. It's going to be the first movable bridge in, I believe, almost 75 years to move forward along the Sacramento River all the way down into the Bay Area. This is a very large-scale project. One that involved multiple years. I believe we're in our 10th or 11th year on this project, including a just over a year-long community engagement strategy where we looked at multiple concepts of this bridge, which involved Congresswoman Matsui, city council members on both sides of the river, as well as a lot of folks that were participating in in-person meetings as well as online meetings in order to come up with this what will be a regional icon and the only movable vertical lift tight arch bridge in the world. So we're very excited about this project. We are coming very close to getting to the point where we are shovel ready. Right now, we're in the final design phase. We do have some funding that we are looking to fill, but we're pretty confident that through the Highway Bridge Program, Caltrans will be authorizing the necessary funds to get this project moving so that we can initiate construction in 2025. Next slide. So along with this there's a bridge that's just downstream, and that's the historic I Street Bridge that was built in 1911. It is a functionally obsolete bridge in that it has 9-foot travel lanes currently on the bridge deck itself. So for those of you who are familiar with it and have tried to pass over it, it is not uncommon to have people slapping mirrors on the way over. So the big question was, what do we do with this, which is also an icon in itself, being one of the heaviest swing span bridges in the world, or in the United States, we think maybe the world. It also is one of the oldest swing bridges in all of California. So we want to make sure that we're preserving this historic bit of infrastructure. So what we'd look to do is, back in 2015, West Sacramento, myself, and some of you might know Chris Doherty at SACOG, were brainstorming over a beer trying to figure out what to do with this bridge. And almost as a joke, we said, well, why don't we turn it into a bicycle and pedestrian bridge? It actually caught traction. We were able to secure funding from Caltrans to study it. We've actually secured the rest of the funding through state ATP, the $16 million required for construction. So this is a fully funded project ready to move forward. We are in the middle of final design now. We're very excited about it. There has been a lot of interest on both sides of the river, seeing where this is going to go. On the Sacramento side, this goes directly into Sacramento Valley Station, the regional mobility hub for Sacramento, West Sacramento, our entire region, and Amtrak as well. And on our side of the river, it actually goes into the Washington District, which is our oldest historic community in our city, developing around the same time as Old Town Sacramento back in the day. So we've got a lot of development that's moving forward in the Washington District. David can talk to you a little bit more about that, but this is another exciting project that we're looking forward to. Next slide. So along with, trying to expand land use intensity, density, comes mobility and connectivity. We have been working on a streetcar extension, our light rail extension project for, since 2006, 2007. This project has gone through multiple iterations. It was a much larger project, and actually not a light rail extension, but just its own closed streetcar system when we initially started. We had finished much of the design that was required. We went out to bid, and it turned out to be much more expensive than any of the engineers' estimates from Sacramento Regional Transit. Since then, we worked with Congresswoman Matsui and the leadership on both sides of the city to reduce this project down to an extension of the existing light rail service, but for reasons of maintaining the $50 million in federal funding that we received from an appropriation through FTA, as well as $30 million in TIRCIP funds, we have to continue calling it streetcar, even though it is an extension of SAC-RT's light rail system. Along with that, the City Council here in West Sac has allocated an additional $600,000 to study the future extension of that light rail system into our Southport Town Center, which is the core of our Southport community hub just south of the Deepwater Ship Channel. We've had that on the books since the 90s to have light rail extending down through West Sacramento. But over the years, it just didn't quite happen. We're very, very close now at this point. So the project is being led by Sacramento Regional Transit with a $25 million allocation from City of West Sacramento. City of Sacramento contributed funding to this early on in the project to the tune of around $7 million. SACOG provided $5 million for this project. We are getting close to completing the redesign of this, utilizing much of the existing track. This will connect between Sacramento Valley Station and Sutter Health Park in West Sac, and again, extend another 3 miles down south till we get into Southport to serve pretty much half or more of our residents in West Sacramento. Next slide, please. Plug-in partnership is an interesting one, just from the standpoint of, I know this committee is particularly interested in air quality, so I went ahead and threw this in. This was SACOG funding that we received, nearly $3 million on that side, and then plus additional local funds that we received. The total cost is now, I believe, at $3 million. We've been able to expand EV charging throughout the city. We've already started construction. We've designed to have 26 dual port, level 2 chargers, 10 single port, 12 DC fast chargers, and even a free wire. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but this is where they use recycled car batteries that go into the equipment for a charger that only requires the same infrastructure as a level 2, but it can actually fully charge a vehicle as a super fast charger with a 200 kilowatt power supply that only comes from a level 2 input. So it actually very helpful when it comes to reducing infrastructure costs for implementing EV charging. We're really excited about this. We counted it, and turns out we'll have somewhere around 1 EV charger for every 300 residents by the time these are all in. So we would be rivaling the Bay Area when it comes to the number of EV chargers, which we should have them all in by summer of 2024. Next slide. So this is the Washington District Underground Utility Infill and Upgrade Project. Again, David will talk about the Washington District, but we were very excited to receive $4 million in Green Means Go funding to analyze and environmentally clear and engineer infrastructure upgrades for the entire Washington District, including our water lines, sewer lines. This is a project that will definitely foster and spur on some additional infill housing growth. This is one of the denser areas of the city, and it's also right over the river from the urban core of Sacramento. So we're excited to see this move and very pleased that we could kickstart what we've been hoping to do for a long time with the Green Means Go funding. Next slide. So this is the Riverfront Street widening. We actually needed to widen this out on 5th Street in order to provide bicycle and pedestrian facilities that were non-existent. We had a number of folks that were starting to bike commute from our Southport area after we put in the Mike McGowan Bridge. That's a bridge connecting South River Road with Village Parkway in West Sac over the Barge Canal. So when folks started riding their bikes up, they realized, oh, we're running into a problem where we don't have any facilities. So we worked hard to secure funding through SACOG, $3.68 million. So a total of $12.6 million project. We have already constructed a huge portion of this. If you go out there today, you'll see that the paving is done, the bike lane, the cycle track, multi-use trail on one side is complete. And the Riverfront Street extension itself is also done. So we're getting close to wrapping this project up. We're really excited that it'll really help foster that bike ped connectivity locally. Next slide. So along those lines, we did receive $3.5 million from SACOG to complete the phase 2 of Sycamore Trail. For those of you that are not familiar, this trail extends almost the entire length of the city from north to south over the Deepwater Ship Channel, connecting with our Clarksburg Branch Line Trail, which is the former YOLO Short Line Railroad that we converted from through a Rails to Trails project into Class 1 bike path. So this bridge actually goes over US 50. If you go over there now, you'll see that this is under construction. We should have it completed by the early part of the summer of 2024 next year. And I'm excited to ride my bike over it. Next slide. This is the North Riverwalk Trail, also another one that's done. So this is the extension of, for those of you, if you've been into West Sacramento, you go along the riverfront there, you'll see a very beautiful promenade. That is our Riverwalk Trail. This is the Riverwalk North extension, goes from the I Street Bridge north all the way up into A Street in the city of West Sacramento. So you'll see the map over on the right there. It's an extensive extension of the trail. Included in that were crossings over the railroad, which was very much a challenge, but we are ultimately appreciative of Union Pacific working with us to ensure that we're able to get 88 crossings over their rail corridor and then allow people to continue with their recreation activities to the north. Next slide. This is David. So that's all the ones I have there, and I'll pass it over to David to talk about some of our land use projects in Southport.
Thanks, Jason. So all of the transportation improvements that Jason and his team are effectuating, are all interwoven and tied to our various land use growth and plans that we have throughout the city. This is a specific plan that is currently proposed in the Southport district. 340 some acres and about 1,500 units along in our Southport area. It's adjacent to the trail, adjacent to the new levee system and Bees Lake, which is a very cool habitat restoration and opportunity. Now that the levees have been approved along the Sacramento River, there's a lot more area over there for habitat restoration, public access. We will be paved. There's a trail on top, which we will be paving, and this will all get tied into Clarksburg and also, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Great Delta Trail network as well will be tied into. So this is one project. It's currently proposed. Expect it will probably go through the hearing cycle sometime next year. So this is one that's been in the works for a while, and we're hoping we can get to finish line on this one, hopefully not before too long. Next slide, please. So also in Southport, this will be kind of in the southwestern corner of the city. This is a project called Yarborough. It was actually approved back in 2008, kind of went on ice for a while during the recession. But it's been back for the last couple of years, and we're trying to flesh out some of the details. This is the single largest project the city has ever seen in terms of acreage and housing units. We're looking at over 700 acres and around 3,000 housing units, as well as an 18-hole golf course that will be open to the public. So this is one where now we're working on some of the subdivision map details, some of the fiscal considerations of the project, trying to get everything advanced to where, how things are thought of now in 2023, noting how much the world has changed really since this project was going through in the mid to late aughts. So this is one, well, I expect to probably start turning dirt probably within the next 2 years. Next slide, please. Another big one. This is in the southeast corner of our Southport district. This is one called River Park. There's another one that was also approved back in 2008 and kind of went on ice due to the recession, but has been back for the last 4 or 5 years. This particular project was uniquely affected by the levee footprint in this particular area where there was a goal to try to provide a little more capacity in the river channel to minimize scouring as it goes around the bend there, and scouring both on our side of the river as well as the Sacramento side of the river. So the net one on this is about 370 acres, and in total, this area probably about 2,700 units. Ultimately, once you factor in some of these other kind of hashed in sites that are not a part, but are ultimately planned for development as well. So next slide, please. And then Washington, now sort of flipping things. This is as Jason mentioned, this is in the more northern part of our city. It's our oldest part of our city. Contains most of our remnant historic buildings and features. And there was a specific plan done there in the mid-90s. And that's where one of those early plans, Jason mentioned, even got it started introducing light rail coming into West Sacramento way back then. So we've been working on an update to this specific plan, and we're nearing the finish line on that now to try to bring this in, be a little more contemporary, and work in everything that we believe nowadays, new design guidelines, better historic preservation, a whole public arts plan, and a lot more wayfinding, particularly since this area is right along the Sacramento River. But, you know, honestly, if you're a block or two away, you might not even realize that. Due to, you know, the levees, and you have large buildings on the river, a lot like the Ziggurat and CalCERS, and soon the River One project, which will be right at the foot of the Tower Bridge. So this is an important one in this neighborhood as well. It's a wonderful eclectic mix of grid streets, newer development, older development, amazing trees, and, you know, really is a real gem, I think, in our community that we're going to really be able to show off more as we get a little more infill going in there. The infrastructure project that Jason mentioned really is completing a much larger infrastructure project that was completed a couple of years ago in this neighborhood. We more or less started from scratch, from a utility infrastructure in this neighborhood. You know, some of the pipes in the ground were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Some of them had just completely crumbled. So in other words, to help prepare for more development and development that had been long planned, city leveraged a lot of funds, including what Jason mentioned, the SACOG funding, to complete all of the necessary infrastructure, both below ground and at ground level, to facilitate making this area happen. It even includes what we call the Poem Street, where there's a sidewalk that runs east-west on E Street that actually has a poem inlaid into the sidewalk, which is actually pretty cool to see. Next slide, please. And I think we might be at the end.
Great, thank you.
We could have thrown a million more slides in there, but wanted to get you the what we thought was the best.
Well, board members, we have any questions? Okay, any comments from the public?
No public comment.
Okay, I did have two questions. I know you didn't necessarily get this specific in the presentation, but I just know from the small amount of time I've spent driving through West Sac and stuff that you guys definitely have a mix of density going on, and you have some higher density projects as well, kind of in the areas particularly closer to the river and around the ballpark. Have any of that been challenging from a public opposition standpoint, or has the public been generally supportive of those projects?
I would say that we've had good support for our higher density projects along the riverfront in those areas. We have not experienced opposition along that line in those areas. There is a belief that if that stuff is necessary, that's where it should go. And so we've been very fortunate in that regard. And there's a lot more to come. We're just getting started on some of that, but we already have had stuff at 70 to the acre, and I anticipate being able to get even higher than that as we progress.
Okay, and I know you did talk about some infill developments you guys are doing in the Washington area. Infrastructure, the biggest challenge to that? Are there other challenges that you face?
Infrastructure historically had been the biggest challenge there. We were sort of replacing it block by block, which is not very efficient. So we've done that more comprehensively throughout that neighborhood now. That area is rich in not only historic resources, but also cultural resources. So we have to be very sensitive to both of those particular fronts. And then overall, PG&E is an area where, we do need to work closely with PG&E to make sure that we can, supply some of our higher density developments. while still minding some of our climate action, objectives. But fortunately, that's a low VMT area, to begin with. So it's a great place for us to infill, and there will be a lot more to come.
Okay, great. Vice Chair Lozano.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very well done. I'm somewhat familiar with the area from my visits to the ballpark over the years. One of the questions kind of goes back to what Chair Bradford was asking about in terms of higher density development going into that river area. I know that a lot of that is former industrial zone or former industrial area with the rail yards there and all that. Was there an issue with cleanup from prior uses, and how did you guys address that issue?
Over there in the area around where the stadium is, we were fortunate that it wasn't too bad. A lot of it was rail, yes, but there was a lot of agricultural industries, even going back to the turn of the last century, salmon canneries, things like that. So there are some isolated areas where certain uses were, definitely put some stuff into the ground you don't want, but by and large, we were not as bad off as you might think. Definitely not the same thing, say, as Sacramento has experienced in the rail yards over there with the heavy rail activity. So we certainly have had to do some remediation, but we've been able to accomplish that. The Ironworks project over there was actually built partially on former UP land. The stadium still has some monitoring wells around it from when it was first built, late 90s into 2000. So we've had some challenges there, but they've been able to overcome. But I think we were fortunate that from 100 years of industry, it was not as bad as one might think it could have been.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any additional questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, thank you again for joining us today and for the presentation. It's appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So next, we're going to move on to item 4, SB 375, greenhouse gas reduction target, and Kyle is going to be presenting this. Morning, Kyle, or good afternoon. I guess it's not morning anymore.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. And yes, good afternoon to the rest of the members of the Land Use and Natural Resource Committee. I do have a presentation for you today, so let me get my slides up. All right, can you all see this? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So my name is Kyle Shipley. I'm the Transportation Modeling and Analysis Group Manager here on your staff at SACOG. I'm here today to present on information item on SB 375 and our greenhouse gas reduction target. So this is a blueprint information item. It's going to be the first part of a 3-part series on our greenhouse gas reduction target. We will be coming back to you with more information over the next few months. Today, I'd like to focus specifically on our state requirements related to greenhouse gases. And we'd really like to hear from this committee on any additional information you'd like us to discuss, and we'll be sure to bring that back as the next parts of the series. So I have a few items to go over today. First, a brief overview on the 2025 blueprint. Second, a summary on our sustainable community strategy and what that is. Next, on our regional greenhouse gas reduction target. And finally, some of the implications if we are not able to achieve that target. So first of all, what is the 2025 blueprint? The blueprint is our regional long-range transportation and land use plan policy document. This is mandated by both the federal and state governments. The plan is a financially constrained plan. It outlines the recommendations for public land use policy and transportation investment strategies for the Sacramento region for the next 20 to 30 years. The blueprint includes a sustainable community strategy, or SCS, which demonstrates the region can achieve a state-mandated greenhouse gas emission reduction from passenger vehicles through integrated land use and transportation planning. The blueprint is also going to be shaped by the triple bottom line goals of equity, economy, and the environment. This was outlined in the policy framework adopted by the board last year. So I'd like to give a little bit of information on the background of SB 375 and how it came to be, and how it relates to AB 32 and CARB's latest scoping plan. So back in 2006, the legislation passed a California Global Warming Solutions Act. This is also known as Assembly Bill AB 32, which created a comprehensive multi-year program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in California. AB 32 required the California Air Resource Board, or CARB, to develop a scoping plan that described the approach California will take to reduce greenhouse gases to achieve the reduction in emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. It's worth noting that the latest scoping plan that I have on this screen lays out a path to achieve target for carbon neutrality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 85% below 1990 levels no later than 2045. So the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, also known as SB 375, supports the state's climate goals set out by AB 32 by helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions through a coordinated transportation, housing, and land use planning. Back in 2017, CARB updated the mobile source strategy, and this is which updates SB 375 greenhouse gas reduction target for the SACOG and the other regions. So under the Sustainable Communities Act, the California Air Resource Board sets the regional targets for greenhouse gas emission reduction for passenger vehicle use. CARB sets these targets for 2020 and 2035 for each of the 18 MPOs back in 2010. And then, as I mentioned, they updated this and updated the targets in 2018. Each of the regions must prepare an SCS as an integral part of its regional transportation plan that contains land use, housing, and transportation strategies, if implemented, would allow the region to meet CARB's targets. So once the SCS is adopted, CARB must review the adopted SCS and accept or reject it if they feel it will meet the targets and comply. So if the SCS would not meet the regional targets, the MPO must prepare what's called an APS, or an alternative planning strategy, that shows how it could meet the targets if properly resourced. So once also an SCS, once adopted, this can provide developers, they can get relief from certain environmental review requirements under the California Environmental Quality Act, such as known as CEQA. So if their projects are consistent with the region's SCS strategies, this can help achieve the reduction target. This is the kind of the carrot that the state is giving us as part of the SCS strategies. So what is SACOG's regional greenhouse gas target? As I mentioned, CARB is tasked with setting all of the region's targets. This update happens every 8 years, with the option of revising them every 4 years. Back in 2018, CARB adopted a more aggressive SB 375 target to support the progress of the latest scoping plan. So SACOG's target for the greenhouse gas reduction is stated as a percentage decrease per capita greenhouse gas compared to 2005 levels. And you can see on this table the revised greenhouse gas reduction target that CARB has given us for our adopted 2020 MTP-SCS and our 2025 blueprint is a 19% reduction target by 2035. I should also note the 19% reduction target is contingent on the state support of funding of the Green Means Go pilot project. So all three of our previous MTP-SCSs showed we would, in fact, achieve the greenhouse gas reduction target if implemented. An SCS that meets that target allows the region to compete for certain state transportation funds. The SACOG region has received over $1 billion in transportation funding from the state through these programs since 2018. But we know the target is getting more and more challenging to achieve due to a number of factors I'll address in this presentation. So first, what's the implications of not having an SCS if we do not achieve the greenhouse gas target? As I mentioned earlier, that puts us in a responsibility to create an APS. This is an additional scenario of the MTP SCS horizon year. And this needs to include additional measures necessary to meet that greenhouse gas emission reduction target. There are also several state funding programs that require the region to have an adopted SCS, not an APS, in order to compete for those funds. So on this slide, I listed out some of those state funding risks. The funding sources at risk if the greenhouse gas reduction target cannot be met is these competitive transportation funds created by SB1. There's also other funding programs funded by the California Cap and Trade program listed here. The Solutions for Congested Corridors program, Trade Corridor Enhancement program, Local Partner program, and the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital program. So as I mentioned, we know achieving the 2035 greenhouse gas reduction target is going to be especially challenging this round due to several factors. First, population growth nationally, statewide, and regionally has been slowing down. And this can be particularly challenging when our reduction target is a per capita rate. Also, the region has had many successes in planning for and even catalyzing the growth patterns called for in the MTP SCS, but we found we continue to struggle unlocking some of the infill potential in many of the corridors within the region's existing footprint. Also, while still crucial services for many residents in the region, we've seen transit ridership decline during and following the pandemic. So this graph here, developed by CARB, shows the latest VMT or vehicle miles traveled data is still increasing. This represents a major challenge for the state to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. So when we look at this graph, you can see based on CARB's scoping plan, you can see the red line here is if we continue our historical VMT trends, we will not achieve the carbon neutrality 2045 target. The blue line you see is even if we stabilize VMT at current levels, we still miss the goal. And conversely, the green line is the trajectory outlined by CARB's scoping plan that is needed to support the carbon neutrality by 2045. It's worth noting that this trajectory proposes 25% reduction from 2019 VMT levels by 2030 and an additional 30% reduction by 2045. So I mentioned that this is the first of three-part series. We're going to come back to you in November. Here, we're going to look at our learnings from the pathway testing we did this spring and how our modeling of greenhouse gas emissions relates. Also, what other factors are contributing to these results. And finally, the land use and transportation strategies that might help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Early next year in 2024, once we have our discussion scenario, we'll bring back some greenhouse gas preliminary results, as well as look at policy options and measures used by other MPOs to achieve these targets. So we also presented this item in the Transportation Committee earlier today, and I just wanted to give a little feedback of what we heard from some of your colleagues. One was how might electrification impact the change on these targets and planned policy? So we know that this is a state mandate to change vehicle electrification by 2030, but we also know that it's not going to get us all the way there on its own. There's still a lot of remaining fleet, right? Vehicles are lasting a lot longer. There's a lot of combustion engines still on the road. And so we can't rely solely on that, but we are working with CARB and CARB staff on what the electrification may change, and that will be part of their next scoping plan. The second question was how might telework impact greenhouse gas reductions in our region? Regarding telework, we've had telework assumptions and we review it in all our plans, but I think we're going to do a much deeper dive into this particular plan. We're looking at how telework is changing since the pandemic as some people return back to work and other preferences for telework. So we've been conducting surveys and research on this. Some of the initial studies we found is, well, if people are not commuting to work, they're still traveling, whether that mean going to the grocery store, doing additional trips during the day. And so depending on the policies and the strategy, it's not always going to reduce VMT like we hoped it is. So we plan to bring back more information on our initial findings and what telework policies might actually help us achieve the greenhouse gas reduction target. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and open it up to any questions. We also have Clint Holtzen, SACOG's planning manager, on the line. He was also the former MTP project manager, so he can help us out with any questions in the past.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. We'll start with Director Klosowski.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I just was hoping you could expand a little bit. When you got to the slide where you were talking about challenges that are making it difficult to meet these goals, one of them that you mentioned was population growth flattening out. How is that a bad thing? That's the way you kind of indicated.
So it really has to do, thank you, Director Kozlowski. It's a good question. And it really has to do that the target is set on a per capita rate. So we know when we look at the growth in the region, this is kind of one of our major levers to reduce VMT and greenhouse gas at a per capita rate. But when there's not that new growth going into the region, it gets difficult because we can't really change what's on the ground as much now, and that amount of growth in the per capita rate, the total population is less. So it just makes it difficult to achieve that per capita target. But you're correct that the overall emissions may be slightly less. Clint, do you want to elaborate any more on that?
Yeah, I'd like you to, Clint, if you could, because what you're saying there, Kyle, is that and it's difficult to listen to this presentation without feeling like our options are limited and the forecast is bleak. So if we are not adding population and we were counting on population to dilute the overall, how do we make up for that? Or are we chasing a ghost here in terms of the strategies that we're using?
I think so. It's not necessarily a bad thing, as Kyle said, that our population is slower because, like he said, emissions might be down as well. It does create the challenge on a per capita target for the reasons that Kyle was saying. Is because you're not generating that growth, you don't see the same type of transformation in the built environment as if you're a rapidly growing region. We do assume in the growth forecast for the SES that we will still be a faster growing region than the rest of the state, and our growth projections are faster than what you might have seen come out of DOF even recently, Department of Finance even recently. And part of that is not that growth projection. The growth that we are forecasting is not a given. It is in part predicated on there are actions that we can take that improve our competitive advantage to continue growing faster than the rest of the state, to attract a young and talented workforce. So it's not all bleak, but from a per capita greenhouse gas target, just that the less population, the fewer capitas, it does make that greenhouse gas reduction a little more challenging. But I'd say in a lot of ways, we just have to be a bit more creative about some of the strategies we're looking at, because you may not see the same you may not see the same magnitude of greenhouse gas reduction from land use change in a slower growing region, but through the telework strategies that we're talking about, on the electric vehicle side, while that's accounted for in the scoping plan, anything that this region is doing to invest in charging infrastructure, in EV deployment, that accelerates kind of acceptance or the penetration of EVs into the fleet, or zero emission vehicles into the fleet, we take credit for that. So I think we just would be looking at a different set of strategies, or a slightly different set of strategies than we've looked at in past plans, where we really had to lean on the land use transformation. It's still going to be a critical strategy, but it's just not going to be the thing that moves the needle all the way this time. But we shouldn't say it's not a bleak thing that we're not growing quite as fast.
Yeah, that's not what I'm, that isn't, the fact that we're not growing doesn't seem bleak. The fact that, you know, each person we add adds emissions of some magnitude, right? So what you're saying is that each new person adds a little less than an average existing person.
Generally, it doesn't have to. It's going to vary throughout the region. So
obviously, somebody moving to Folsom is going to generate more VMT than somebody moving to right next door to wherever they work, right? I guess I'm just saying, but on the whole, on average, a new resident, we have been betting on the fact that a new resident to the region is generating less VMT on average than the existing residents of the region.
I think that's generally fair. There's also, you know, for anybody who's moving within the region, you have more options to move into something that might have, you know, less need to be driving. But I think you're generally correct in that what we had seen kind of way back in the early 2000s was that VMT was increasing significantly faster than population growth. And that has started to flip. And what our plan is forecasting for, is that VMT would grow slower than our population growth. And that's been true in all of our plans. And I think it's even been true in reality. Kyle didn't get a chance to talk about this, but in looking back at 2020, and it's something that we'll need to bring into the blueprint when we report to CARB, is how did we do on our 2020 target? And we overachieved on the 2020 target. I think it was a 6% or 7% target, and we had a 12% reduction per capita.
That's right.
And so we have started to see a shift where VMT, for, like you said, for every resident that we're adding, you're not seeing the same increase in VMT. That could be because of the new residents. They're moving into places they don't have to travel as far, but it's also part of kind of where you're getting employment closer to housing. Existing residents don't need to travel as far as maybe they used to, or you know, as their kids grow up and want to live in the same neighborhood, they don't have to travel as far for jobs anymore. So there's also a change in the existing built environment that benefits existing residents. Maybe not always on the commute trip, because maybe you don't change where you're working, but on all of your other daily activities, to grocery, to retail, to the soccer field, things like that.
Yeah, I get all. I understand all of that. The reason I asked the question is that it's starting to feel more and more like we're going through extraordinary gymnastics trying to direct the land use decisions of developers and local governments towards something that is fixing 4 or 5 or less % of the problem, when all of that time and effort could be spent on electrification of existing infrastructure and existing vehicle fleets, and get a lot more bang for our buck and our time. So anyway, that's all. I'll let it go right there. Thank you.
I hear you.
Thanks, Director. Vice Chair Lozano.
Yeah, a couple of comments real quick. I appreciate my colleagues in the Transportation Committee. I had some of those same questions. Real quick, just on the telework, Kyle, when you mentioned a deeper dive into that, you know, it's one thing for pre-pandemic numbers to be looked at and then see what the pandemic did, and then bring, you know, what's coming back. But I think one point that should be actually really looked at is, even though people are going back to work, a workplace, not all of them are going back to the place they were in terms of location, and they're not going as frequently. And I'll say, you know, I have kind of a unique situation down in Galt where we're a bedroom community, and you know, I don't know the number, and one day I'll figure it out, but I can't tell you how many state workers we have here, and family up in the El Dorado Hills that are state workers. I got 4 family members. None of them are going back to work. The ones that are going 2 days a week. And so that really has to be looked at in terms of BMT and things like that. And I'll tell you, many of them have electric vehicles now. And so I think that's going to be important moving forward to not just look at who's going back to work and who's not, but certainly the amount of hours and the actual miles traveled that are still reduced, even post-pandemic. My question is this, and it's been a while since I was on the board when we did the MTPSCS 4 or 5 years ago. But I think it might be a good refresher for all of us. On I think it's slide 5 or 6, where we talk about the SCS and what's required of it. If you made a comment about development that is outside of the SCS wouldn't be eligible for many of those state grants, like SB1 grants and things. If a developer developed a project anyway, what is I guess what is the outcome of the SCS that would it negatively affect us, and what would CARB do about it? Or is that the only consequence, that they wouldn't be eligible for that grant funding?
You want that, or you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I can start by addressing the telework. So you're absolutely right. One of the pieces that we're looking at is say people that have the opportunity to telework. We know there's a large percentage of state employees in our region. That's a huge sector, right? The state government, that there's telework, and we're trying to get a better sense and better understanding of what's going on since 2020, but also looking at today, right? And how that might change, and then how those policies may change in the future. So I think that's a great point, and that's something we can bring back to you on some of our findings on that telework. But that's exactly when we say we're going to take a deeper dive at some of the things we're looking into. And then I may have misspoke a little bit, but with regards to the developers, that's specifically an SCS allows the developers to have CEQA streamlining access. So they could still go through their project. They just may not be able to take some of those CEQA streamlining benefits, and they may say have to do an entire EIR, in which case, you know, depending on the project, if they were able to comply with the SCS, there may be portions of that they could go through quicker. Clint, do you want to add on to either one of those points?
Yeah, I think for that second part of your question, if a developer, so the SCS does not override any kind of local control, right? So it truly is designed to be a carrot. So if you're consistent with the SCS, you get those streamlining benefits. If you're not consistent with the SCS, doesn't mean that you can't do the project or anything. What the consequences could be, and we've seen this over time, right? Because we have an SCS and we don't hit it exactly every single time, right? We've seen movement towards infill, but it's still not to the magnitude that we think we would need from the SCS. And so the consequences are that that trajectory to get to that 2035 target gets steeper each plan update cycle. So we have to update every 4 years. As far as what CARB is looking for, is we can't pull the wool over our eyes and say, hey, this greenfield development or this development out here is happening, but we're not going to include it in the SCS. We need to include those things that are real and are happening. We have to have a reasonable forecast, even if it is ambitious. It still has to be reasonable and a reflection of what's actually happening and based on the latest planning assumptions and data that's out there. And so over time, if we're not able to keep up with the transportation strategies or the infill strategies or any of those things in the SCS, what it means is every plan cycle, it's a little steeper trajectory, and at some point you end up in the APS because you just don't have a feasible way of getting there any longer. And that's something that the board will have to discuss as we go through this blueprint is, does it still feel feasible to get there? And if not, the consequences are obviously there's some state funding on the line, but we also need to make sure that we've got something defensible.
Okay, and I know we've been doing just a ton of public outreach as we're moving forward. This last year, we've done just a ton of it. I think every jurisdiction's had a pop-up at it. What are we doing to ensure the wants, needs, and desires are heard from the development community? And here's where I'm coming with this.
Mm-hmm.
We have some infill areas here in our city that we would love to get developed. And everybody knows, I mean, this isn't a secret, that infrastructure costs are making things prohibitive even for local jurisdictions to assist the developers with these higher density infill development projects. But there are some areas out South County, and I'm sure in many jurisdictions, that are ripe for the picking to develop, whether it be industrial, higher density, or single family homes. And so at what point are we reaching out to those that community, and are we doing a separate outreach for them to see how we could balance some of their needs with the needs of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions?
So we do reach out to, so we have already reached out to the development community. We've worked with the Building Industry Association as we've gone through, and we've given them a couple of presentations on the pathways work we've done on the blueprint already. I think we're going back here at some point soon to do another presentation on the Green Means Go effort. So while not blueprint proper, right, it's a very related effort. We've got a developer roundtable that we've convened there to kind of dive into the barriers for infill development and what's needed. And that a lot of that is what will be driving the strategies in the SCS for, how do we get this stuff to happen? Why is it not happening? In AB 350, our bill to extend the timeline, we've also committed in that to make sure we're monitoring the kind of the development side of our plan, the land use development part of our plan. Not just are we on track, but are we on track? Where are we falling short? And what are the reasons for doing that? And that's something that we're working with the BIA to make sure that we're kind of examining the reasons why we may not be achieving the things in our plan, or maybe not see the infill realized in our plan. So we do have quite a bit of touch points with the development community, with the BIA, with builders. We operate a little bit separately outside of just the public review process. On those, the public review, we want to make sure we get community insights and needs and concerns and things like that. And then we'll also meet with local jurisdictions, developers, builders, kind of in a separate process.
Thank you so much. That was a great kind of refresher, and I appreciate you taking the time, and great presentation, Kyle. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Any more board member questions or comments on this? Okay, seeing none, I actually have one. I kind of wanted to focus in a little bit on the challenge with respect to transit in post-pandemic and what's been going on with transit. Something that I've kind of been hearing, as I talk to people, and it kind of makes sense. We've mentioned that, really trips didn't necessarily decrease the number of trips, but where those trips are and when those trips has kind of changed. And I'm wondering if, how much our transit agencies have really been looking at that and evaluating that and looking maybe for other opportunities. And I kind of bring this up. I took recently, I actually took public transit twice, which I don't really have the opportunity to do very much, given that it's not very accessible where I live. I took Capitol Corridor to a Giants game over the weekend, which was an amazing experience. And one of the things that surprised me, but in a positive way. I wanted to take the 9 a.m. train. First of all, it runs almost every hour, which is great. It's convenient. It's easily accessible. They've got some deals on ticketing that if you're going with more than one person, it makes it much more affordable and really pretty comparable, if not cheaper than driving for a group. And so that's also important. But so the 9 a.m. train was like the train that worked best for the game, but it was actually completely sold out when I went to buy tickets the day before. And I was shocked and pleased by that. And I got some tickets on the 8 a.m. train, so I had to go a little earlier than I wanted, but great experience. But even that train was super full. Like it was hard to find a seat on the train. And, you know, people were going mostly to the Niners game, actually. There were 90% of the folks on that train seemed like they were in Niners jerseys, and then there were some Giants fans. And so it really showed, I think, that maybe the increasing potential of transit from a recreational standpoint as a, you know, to pivot from commute. And I also say that with respect to, like, even in the area I am, I know a lot of the Yuba Sutter commuter transit service has been great for many years, and they've been severely impacted by the state's decision to mostly go to remote, because most of their ridership were state employees, right? And I actually took that downtown for something yesterday. It worked out timing wise, and it was also great. But, you know, if the bus was 25% full, you know, that might, it was less than 25% full probably. And I know that when I used to work downtown at one point and I would take that again, it was odd to see a vacant seat or many vacant seats, right? And so big difference. But, you know, I often think just for my own, you know, when I might use transit, gosh, if I could take a bus to downtown Sacramento to go to something at Golden One, or to go out to dinner and drinks with my wife, and then could take a bus back to Plumas Lake later in the evening, I would do that. And I feel like other people would do that too, probably more than would currently use it for commuting. I mean, you know, obviously I don't have the numbers to back that up, just people I talk to. They seem to be interested in transit service for recreational purposes. And I just don't know, particularly from the outlying areas, that those are really options to get into the urban core kind of after business hours. And you're really left with driving as really the only option. I mean, and so just maybe, you know, as we move forward, looking at ways that we can at least investigate that as an option to maybe reduce VMT through getting people on transit for other trips that we haven't historically looked at. And conversely, you know, we've got 18,000 seat amphitheater here in Yuba County, and traffic's a mess when there's concerts there. And there's literally zero transit option for people to get there. And if there were, it would cut down on traffic, it would cut down on VMT. You know, how do we explore some of those things to hopefully, you know, help with this challenge maybe? Anyway, that's it. More of a comment, but if anyone has an answer, I'd love to hear it.
I guess I can start that. I think that's a great point and something we can look into, right? Perhaps commuting transit has declined, but maybe there's some other alternatives that we can look at ridership that you know, if there's a need and people want. We do have a big data pilot project, or a big data platform. It's called Replica, and I think that's something we can look into further and bring back some more information. But I think it's a great point.
Yeah, thank you.
And to your point, Director Bradford, and when we did both the built environment poll that we did with Valley Vision, as well as the focus groups that we recently did that you heard about, I think, last month, there was you know, it's not the majority of residents, but it was a significant portion of residents that mentioned that, you know, they would be very willing to take transit if it went to the places they want to go beyond just their, you know, their daily commute, their workplace. And that right now it's just, they don't have a good option to get to places where you don't have a start and end date kind of, or end time kind of certainty, right? Like your daily job. And I think the real challenge that we face there is, you know, how much will it cost to run those services and how big, right? There's events and there's rerouting for events and things like that. But if those services are serving like a handful of trips, that's often why you don't see them on a fixed route bus just going to, you know, a grocery store and things like that, because they may not generate sufficient ridership. And so we are always kind of in this balance between the frequencies that we're able to offer that are very convenient and the coverage that we're able to offer, because that is also expensive. So I don't think there's an easy answer at all to your observation, but it is absolutely something, like Kyle said, that maybe Replica can help us wrestle with. Also, the regional transit network that's being developed. I think that is another helpful tool that might bring some information that we can consider as we're building the transit strategies for the plan.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else before we move on to the next item? Okay, thank you. Next up is item 5, South Sacramento area tour. Mia.
Yes, thank you. Hello, good afternoon. It's nice to see you all. I am Mia Lopez. I'm on the communications team here at SACOG. You may have heard or received an invite. We are going to be gathering for a tour of the South Sacramento area following the board meeting on Thursday, October 19th. I almost said next month. We are in October. The tour is part of the board practices objective in the Racial Equity Action Plan. And the goal and purpose of these tours are to collaborate with partners and CBOs engaged in racial equity work and to facilitate at least one site visit a year in the region. The tour is focused on racial equity, inclusion barriers, and successes. As part of this, we've been working with La Familia, the Franklin Boulevard Business District, Mutual Housing, and also Sacramento RT, who will all be attending the tour to talk about projects happening in the area. I can tell you there's a lot of activity spurring. I've learned so much while working on this project, and our partners are really excited to share with you all. Some of the highlights include La Familia's campus. We'll be getting to see the new site for their Opportunity Campus in progress and learn how they have helped shape the Franklin District Climate and Revitalization Playbook and how they're bringing livability and spurring investment at the community level to provide more resources to community members. We'll also be driving through the Franklin Boulevard Business District, and they will be sharing the history of the district and the role they've played in supporting family-owned businesses. Also learn more about the upcoming Complete Streets project that is set to break ground next year. And we'll also be stopping by the San Juan Motel site on Stockton Boulevard. The project has received $2 million in early activation funding from Green Means Go. So we'll be able to hear from Sacramento County and Mutual Housing on the challenges and future for the affordable housing project. Lastly, there's just a lot packed into this agenda. We have a lot of amazing community partners on board and who are excited to share about their neighborhoods. We hope to get the majority of board members to attend. And if you're available, I hope you'll join us. It will begin and end at La Familia right after the board meeting. And we're going to plan on being back by 2 p.m. The program also includes lunch. So you can RSVP by raising your hand here, or you can also send me an email. Director Baines, I have you signed up. Director Bradford and Director Nisley. Yes, thank you. I have you all on the list, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up is committee member reports. So do any directors have anything? Okay, seeing none. Anything from staff? Okay.
We're all good.
Great. So looks like the only other thing is one receive and file and then adjournment. And I would request that we adjourn today in memory of Senator Dianne Feinstein. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good job.